Hi, I am Nadia Colburn, and I am here today with Kelvy Bird, and we're going to be talking about generative scribing. So let me show you. This is Kelvy's new book, and Kelvy is an internationally recognized graphic facilitator, and she'll tell you more about what that means. And her book was recently released, and we're going to be talking about that today. And I am Nadia Colburn, and I am a writing teacher and writing coach, and you'll learn more about what I do as well. So let's begin. So thank you, Kelvy, for being here with me.
Thanks for having me.
So first, will you tell us what is generative scribing and what is it, graphic facilitation?
Sure, yeah. So graphic facilitation is a process where a group is speaking and I will visually capture what it is they're saying and help make connections and essentialize the content. So I don't write down every single thing they're saying, but I help create an overall picture of the content. And that's what is generally known as graphic facilitation or scribing. And generative scribing expands on that by drawing from source or drawing in, considering energy in the equation. So it's not just working from the head, but it's also working from the heart and sort of through the entire body and sensing what wants to come into the room and into the drawing and adding that in. So it's in a way, a more integrative approach to the drawing.
That's beautiful. So I didn't know about graphic facilitation or scribing until we met. And we met because you were in the early stages of working on this book and you were looking for a writing coach. And there's a lot of overlap between the work that you do and the work that I do. Because in my writing coaching, I try to go beneath the surface as well and kind of ask what's trying to emerge. So I think both of us have a real interest both in the personal dynamics of what happens in that process and in the social implications for doing this kind of work. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one of the things that I really love about scribing, and just to say my background is in fine arts. So I studied fine arts at college and art history, and I painted for a long time. And then I started doing this graphic facilitation in the context of collaborative workshops. And what I quickly realized and really loved about it is that it's activated by the people in the room. So the drawing doesn't exist without the people in the room. So whereas for studio artists, the content is mine. So I still paint on and off, and it's something that comes through me alone. But scribing comes through a group. So by nature, it's a social art, and it's dependent on the group. Does that answer what is that where you were going? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of dimensions to it, and I think that's a really important one. You talk about how society is in desperate need of seeing.
Yeah.
And it's a time with open eyes to see clearly and act, and part of that is to come out of the individual self and to listen to and pay attention to the collective. And so you're talking about scribing as a new art form for the 21st century that looks at this more collective experience and responds to it appropriately.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is important to note about the practice is that scribes we're drawing in contexts all over the place, in all sectors, in local community meetings, in high-level global meetings, in government, in education, business. And so we're working with people who have lots of different views and are coming from a whole spectrum of positions. And my thinking, I think this was something we were working together around the time of the election, I remember. And my belief is that as scribes, it's like a the role of the artist is to help, is to help reveal, right? It's to mirror back in some way what's happening in society, or what's happening in ourselves, that then we can reflect upon, and then take action based on reflection rather than just mindless action. And given that we're in so many places, the scribes, it just seems like the right time to really be considering that responsibility and the privilege of it, that we're showing up in places where in a subtle way we have influence, because we're choosing what to reflect back on the wall. So by the choices that we make, the quality of attention that we put to the choices that we make while we're drawing subtly feeds back into the group that's looking at it. So that's what I mean by the seeing.
Yeah.
So we're seeing as individuals, but we're facilitating collective seeing through our work.
And it's really interesting to bring art into these spaces that aren't necessarily artistic spaces,
Mm-hmm.
the World Bank or Fortune 500 company, these big meetings. So, but what is it like to translate conversation? And I would imagine you're also translating some of what's unspoken, group dynamics, coming to a visual representation so that the people in the meeting then can see themselves, that power that art has to show us ourselves so we can be more self-reflective and then act differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tricky because I always try to be very respectful of what's said, and I never write something that's what I think or my own words. I will only recreate words that someone has spoken on a wall. And I should also note, I'm going to hold up a drawing just so people who aren't familiar with this can just see like what this looks like.
I was about to do that too.
So it's kind of like, that's a drawing on a chalkboard.
Can you bring it even closer to the screen?
So that's a drawing on a chalkboard that was about 8 feet long that I did during a 90-minute session. And let me just see if I have one more. Like this is one that was in a conference. So this was a big, like maybe 20 or 30 feet long, big sort of mural. And then this is what it looks like when I'm doing it. I'm just like drawing while people are talking onto a surface. And sometimes the surfaces are white, black, dry erase, big, small, all different. So that's just to give people a sense of what it looks like.
I want to give you and the audience also an image from earlier in the book. So the pictures that Kelvy showed you were pictures from the graphic facilitating conferences, like the work that you're doing. Yeah. But the book also then is self-reflective and talks about the process. And I wanted to show you this picture here because it's really beautiful. It's like Chinese calligraphy. And the scope of talking about the process, the generative process, is helpful for scribes, but it's, for me, also shaped how I thought about things, how I thought about the creative process. I think it's really helpful for anyone thinking about creation, showing up in the world, making change, being present, and how, I'm going to just show you this again. So in the middle is B, and then it goes to, I think it goes, does it start at B and then go down?
Yeah, it's kind of like the top part is what we see. So it's kind of the tip of the iceberg. And then all the rest, which is the majority of the book, is below the iceberg. So it goes from being to joining to perceiving and then to knowing, just kind of like more a root. And then from there back up to drawing or facilitating or coaching or whatever, action.
Or any kind of action. So this could also work for writers, because I would imagine we have some writers here listening to the conversation. So going from being to joining with a community in some form, to joining perhaps your community as a writer is other books, you know, and then going to perceiving, what are your perceptions? What are you bringing to whatever you're creating? Down to knowing, which is a kind of journey down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then back up through this creative act,
Mm-hmm.
bringing them all together
Yeah.
into drawing, into creating, into whatever it is that you're manifesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's also the flow of the book. So that's like the order of the book. But, and to write the book, I had to break it down into a sequence. But when we're scribing or writing or facilitating, all those things are going on at once. So it's not so linear where we say like, okay, now I need to check in with myself and my own awareness and sort of open up from the inside out. And then I need to step into someone else's shoes and be with them. It's all, they happen in different stages as necessary and as the context calls for, really.
Right.
So, yeah.
And to some extent, that's a challenge for all creative acts, right? Because so many things are happening at once. How do we manifest? And I was also interested in working with you because you're used to the creative process, but you weren't as used to writing. Although I have to say the writing in this book is really beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful throughout. But, maybe you could talk a little bit about that translation process, because there's so many forms of translation. So many things are happening at once. And so how, when so many things are happening at once, do you get it into a form that has a shape that you can share with someone else, and then maybe isn't a medium that's like comes so naturally, but that you learn to work with?
So the process of the scribing or of writing?
Both, I think.
Both, yeah. So they're so different
processes, but you could talk about either one, or what's it like for you?
Well, with scribing, it's so immediate because there's no time to really reflect very much. So that perceiving bit is instantaneous. You have to, in one moment, completely immerse yourself in the situation and pull back to see the patterns and, get to the edges of the room and then anchor in and draw. So in scribing, it's very, very fast. And then when people are done talking, usually you're done drawing. And so that's it, right? So 60 minutes, it's done versus however many years it took to write the book. Right. So in writing, I haven't thought about my own model applied to my writing process, to be honest, but it was a real struggle. So I can't talk so much about the writing process, but in the translation of my internal processes drawing, to break that apart in another language, to describe it, took a lot of sitting and conversations in my own head. And then once I had articulated something through language, through the written language, practicing again and actually testing out, was that true? Did that work? So for example, this being, just at the start, do I really take a pause and a breath before I start drawing? Or am I so nervous that I forget that? So I wrote about it. And now when I'm at the wall, I'm like, oh, in my book, I have this whole piece on, on connecting with the sky and with the earth and sort of with the surface or the paper. Let's take a moment and do that. And so my practice has actually shifted because of the writing process. Mm-hmm. But it took a lot of back and forth to be authentic about the content.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting what you say, because when I lead workshops and classes, I often lead people in a meditation before they write. And it's amazing how much writing can get done in a very short time if there's a little meditation beforehand, because it really clears out that space so you can just come through with that kind of clear channel. And I think we have to practice that, though, get in the habit of doing that. And it's not the kind of cultural norm to take a pause. And so to remember, to have techniques, if it's writing books or whatever it is, as practitioners, to say, listen, we're going to do this.
It's so true.
Change how we see, how we interact, what we create, the ease with which we draw our line, whether it's a visual line or a written line.
It's so true, and also throughout. So now that you're talking, just the even as you were speaking, I was so eager to kind of interrupt and like keep going, because the idea really sparked something for me. But the value of pause, you know, in daily, certainly when we're working, right, and sort of being connected with our truer self before we start, before we put mark to paper or word to, you know, to paper, and then throughout. So creating a rhythm that enables break and pause and restabilizing, and kind of keeping consistent with an intentional rhythm, rather than just the pressure of, you know, a deadline. Or it's hard. I mean, scribing is very pressured because it's kind of real time sensitive. But yeah, so the value of the pause, so true. Also, just to remember, like, where are we operating from? Where are we coming from? Are we just putting words out because we're supposed to be writing? You know, every time we were meeting and I needed to have another little chapter done, my 2-page chapters. It was like, oh, I have to write. But the value of just settling in can't be overstated.
Yeah, in your model of practice section, you write, this model of practice addresses the internal coordination required to process multiple inputs and draw in real time, attending inward and outward at once, so often we're outward focused, but you're asking that the outward and the inward are connected. It's not one or the other, but they're in that kind of dialogue, right? Which is a movement, right? And it's like a dance. Just the shapes that you draw in this book have so much, here's another one, have so much movement. So we often think of creative products as static. You know, there's this static thing. And if we reimagine it as relational and dynamic and connecting the inner and the outer, how much that opens up for us, how much that shifts, how much more we can be in the flow. And that can happen in real time. And then with writing, it's very interesting too, because we can take a lot of time, right? And revise. And so we're both present and working with revision and practice. But
there's definitely something to the, I don't know if it's action and inaction, or the breath, you know, like an in-breath and an out-breath. I was at a session once where someone did an exercise with ringing a bell, and it was a mindfulness exercise where I'm sure you know this, where he would ring the bowl, you know, it was a bowl, and it was an attention exercise. So it was, you pay attention to the sound. So at first the sound is loud, and then it you know, it goes like this. It starts to get finer and finer until there's no sound. And so then you pay attention to the sound again. So the whole thing is this infinity loop between sound and silence. And I think it's similar to what we're saying now of the living dynamic in creative acts of expression and contemplation, or like expression and maybe it's like emptiness or something, so that what's coming through is what's meant to come through.
Right.
It's an authentic sound or an authentic gesture. It's not forced, like I was saying before. Yeah.
And it's permanent, always changing. And that kind of attention to the present, what it is in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You're also a co-founder of the Presencing Institute, and could you tell us a little bit about what that is, and your role, and how that fits into this work that you do with your graphic?
Yeah. Well, so I've been working with a group with the Presencing Institute for just over 10 years now, and I wouldn't say I'm like technically co-founder. You know, I wasn't there when the seed concept was started, but I've certainly been working in the field that generated the Presencing Institute and have been with the core team for almost since the beginning. And it was founded by someone named Otto Scharmer and Katrin Kaufer, who are partners, and some other people as well. And so early on, when I got involved, I was mostly helping with the website and things that were not related to visual practice, although at the time I was painting and had a studio. And so everyone was aware of my painting, and they were aware of my professional work as well, which came in later. And I think a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it's hard always to find, people ask me now, sorry, I'm veering off a little bit, but I've been teaching workshops and people have been asking about where are opportunities to do generative scribing. I really want to practice, but if you go to a conference, like a business conference, it may or may not be the right or appropriate place to be sourcing energy. You have to find the right kind of setting and client really to go to a deeper place. But it was with the Presencing Institute that I started to understand that there was even another place to be sourcing information from. More, not cognitive information, but I guess emergent information. So the presencing work is really about sensing into an emerging future and bringing that into the present moment. So rather than projecting an idea or an intent and a vision into the future, forward in one direction, it's kind of going like this and having a sense of what's coming, and then what do I need to let go of? What's coming? What do I need to let go of? And sort of a gentle rocking, almost very much into the present moment. Mm-hmm. And then from that place, gaining insight and finding seeds of the future, or determining your action from that place. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, and I encourage people to explore the work that the Presencing Institute does. It's really interesting, and it's kind of also, I'm thinking about shapes, reimagining, putting a new shape to what we normally think of as linear time moving into the future, kind of like the arrow heading that way, but reimagining, what does that shape look like? How can we be in the present in a different relationship to what's emerging? And I know that there's a large social awareness aspect to the work that you do there as well. What do we need in this period of time that's so fragile, and that so many things are happening so quickly?
Yeah.
How can we respond appropriately? So, for people who are listening, whatever field you're in, I always tell my students to read greedily. So, take from this conversation greedily, think about the shapes of your life and think about whatever it is that sparks you in this conversation, go explore that. How do you engage with your own creative act? How do you engage with the relationship between internal and external, between personal creativity and collective being? Whatever the questions are, really. Also, I think, as you were saying, that in the Presencing Institute, you found, here are other people asking these questions. And what I think is so nice is, here's this field, here's Kelvy who found me, because I was doing something that spoke to her, and then she wanted to, you wanted to work with me, and then your work spoke to me. There are these nice synergies if we kind of open up and look for the things that resonate for us. And I think that's so much what your book is about, is being open to what you're perceiving and shaping that perception and having it be a kind of co-creation, to use maybe an overused term. But
I think too, I think looping back to something we were talking about earlier, that and I know we probably need to wrap it up for everyone viewing, is that in these challenging times, I've found that my coping strategy is to create. You know, I've always created, but I felt especially now that the most impact I can have is through trying to connect in with potential wherever I sense it. If it's in a person, or with how I'm drawing, or in writing a book, that by amplifying the potential in the world is a way to be in this world now.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Because we can think the future is heading just in this one direction, but there's so much more potential than we're often aware of if we can really be aware of that full presence and then tap into all of our sources so that we can manifest, we can create what we want to create. You know, we can, and again, as you said, you're not creating a fantasy. You're creating from what you see, what's necessary in the moment, what's grounded in the present, but with discernment and you know, a lot of beauty. So I really recommend this book. It's beautiful, and whatever your creative practices may be, I think you'll find a lot in it. I'll write some more information about how you can find it down below. And thank you so much, Kelvy, and congratulations on the publication. And it's great to talk to you.
Oh gosh, thank you. If you hadn't coached me, I never would have gotten it done at all. So, well, in large thanks to you that it exists, and I'm grateful for this time together now too. So thanks very much.
Thank you.